two, one, two. One, two, and two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two, one, two.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I feel like I'm a little too tall for the mic. So, a warm welcome to all of you to our discussion this evening. What I'd like to do in getting us started, first of all, is to begin by highlighting why we are here and why this conversation is important. Thereafter, I can go into introducing the panel so that we know our colleagues seated in front of us and what value they are bringing to this conversation. So in terms of the conversation around the role of the private sector in advancing beneficial ownership transparency in Zambia, I think this is a critical conversation. The conversation is timely. Beneficial ownership transparency, for the sake of those that may be newer to the concept, is basically transparency over who ultimately owns or controls corporate vehicles. And this ownership can be both direct and indirect, right? And we understand that company structures sometimes can be complicated, whereas you don't have a company specifically being owned by a particular individual. On top of that company in terms of an ownership structure, but that you can have a company that is owned by another company, a legal person, a juristic person, which is then owned by another company, which is then owned by an individual. So when we talk about beneficial ownership transparency, really, we are talking about the natural person, the real living person, the warm bodies behind companies. And we'll get into why that's important, why focus on the individual in particular. So that is essentially why we are here. I just want to again highlight in terms of providing context to our conversation this evening, and in underscoring why this is important, that different organizations, including the World Bank, the United Nations, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, have interrogated this issue. And the World Bank, for example, in a report in 2011, having surveyed over 200 cases of gun corruption, found that 70% of corruption cases involved anonymously owned companies, meaning companies that it was not clear who owned them or who controlled them. In 2014, a similar study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development found that 3 out of 4 cases of foreign bribery involved intermediaries, including corporate vehicles, at around 85%, as well as agents at around 41%. And this is why beneficial ownership transparency then becomes important, because beneficial ownership transparency answers the question, who benefits from a legal entity or legal arrangement, right? Who ultimately has something to gain, whether it's deriving economic benefit or any other gain from a company. And again, just to make sure that we are all moving together, I just want to quickly highlight in setting the tone for the conversation that it's not just about ownership, it's about control as well. And when we talk about control in the context of beneficial ownership transparency, we are talking about different forms of interest that demonstrate an individual, a particular individual, having sway over a company. And some of you may know that this may include, first of all, your shareholding, which is your typical legal ownership, voting rights, the ability to appoint or remove board members, right? That's control. People that may have an interest in the profit sharing of an entity or have some level of enjoyment of the assets, could be directors as well. Sometimes beneficial owners are directors, or in the case of legal arrangements such as trusts, you would have trustees, but also other forms of influence, in that you have sometimes individuals that are able to direct or provide strategic direction, control or influence the strategic direction of an organization. So that then becomes your control. So I just wanted to underscore that it's not just the aspect of ownership, but also control, and that control, as I like it before, can be direct or indirect. So with that said, I think the idea for this conversation now becomes clearer. So what I'd like to do, before I go into introducing the panel, is to ask Mr. Johannes Ton, who is senior anti-corruption advisor with the Center for International Private Enterprise, to just provide a brief welcome remarks, as well as to also underscore why we're here, and perhaps also link why this conversation is particularly important in the context of democracy strengthening and how it's tied into the Summit for Democracy. So Johannes Ton, please.
I think I will suffer from the same hindrance that you have experienced here. So maybe I'll just lift this up so I can stand straight. Distinguished guests and esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is a true pleasure to welcome you this evening to this important discussion on beneficial ownership transparency, alongside the Summit for Democracy 2023 and the important topics that are being discussed, including the commitments that Zambia has made in the wake of the summit. It is great to be in the beautiful city of Lusaka here in Zambia, and I want to welcome not just you being present here in the room with us, but also the online attendees who follow this live stream. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm heartened to see that there's so much interest in the topic of beneficial ownership transparency and in the importance of involving the private sector. Which is also the reason for why I want to extend a special welcome to representatives of the private sector, from associations and chambers of commerce, but then also to representatives from civil society and the media, all of which play important parts in making democracy work. It is good to see that all these parties bring interest into beneficial ownership transparency, understanding that it does play a vital role in helping us address corruption and thereby strengthen the positives that we can experience through democracy. I represent the Center for International Private Enterprise. We're headquartered in the United States and are a non-governmental, non-profit organization. We operate in about 80 countries. We do that by supporting our partners from business, civil society, and government to advance democratic values by involving and engaging with the private sector and fostering and sponsoring leadership by them. I want to thank the government of Zambia, and in particular the Ministry of Justice, as well as PACRA, for encouraging and welcoming this sort of conversation on the sidelines of the summit. And I want to extend a special thank you to the organizations that have made this possible, this conversation possible, but beyond that, who do their everyday work in promoting beneficial ownership transparency and working on anti-corruption and integrity measures here in Zambia, but throughout the world. Those organizations are, as you can see and undoubtedly know them, Open Ownership, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative in Zambia, as well as Transparency International Zambia. Thank you for all your work. I will not repeat what Mutale aptly put forward in terms of why it matters that we focus on beneficial ownership transparency, nor will I try to preempt what the panel is about to say. I just want to make one particular point, that is that irrespective of whether we look at Zambia or any other country in the world, there continues to be a need to look for entryways, for connecting points where we can find overlap in interest between the private sector and our wider, broader societal interests, usually represented through government and civil society. If and when we can identify that overlap, it will do great benefit to us as societies, to us as business owners, as well as media and all the other organizations that benefit from democratic values. I'll leave it at that. Thank you again for attending tonight's meeting, and thank you for hosting this meeting and working with the panel to elaborate this conversation. I look forward to an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes, underscoring the importance of this conversation, and in particular how we can bring the private sector into the conversation, because I think we all agree that the private sector has been overlooked for far too long, whereas they have a key role to play in advancing the BOT, or beneficial ownership transparency reform agenda in the country. I apologize if I use acronyms. I'm going to be mindful not to, just in case I lose anyone. It's an occupational hazard. So I just want to quickly acknowledge the presence of a couple of individuals in the room. So we have the honor to have Rosetta Tavala, who's Acting Director General of the Public-Private Dialogue Forum. So thank you for being here. Mr. Maurice Nyambe, Executive Director of Transparency International Zambia. Joseph Mwamba Kabuswe, President of the Federation of Small-Scale Miners Association of Zambia. We have in our midst Mr. Tim Hanstad, CEO of the Chandler Foundation, but also recognizing the presence of senior government officials present here, heads of institutions, basically everyone. Everyone is important to this conversation, so it's not to say that some individuals are more important than others. With that said, I'd like to quickly then introduce the panel. I'm sure a couple of people are tired of hearing my voice already. So we have on the panel, would that be my right? Mr. Wilson Banda, who's representing the Patents and Companies Registration Agency. So Mr. Wilson Banda is the acting registrar and chief executive officer for the Patents and Companies Registration Agency, which is the corporate registry in Zambia. He holds a master's and bachelor's degrees in business administration from the Copperbelt University, in addition to his degree in law from the University of Zambia. Mr. Banda has over 22 years of work experience in corporate and intellectual property law, finance, entrepreneurship and innovation, project management, and international trade. So thank you, Mr. Wilson Banda, for joining us for this important conversation this evening. So next to Mr. Wilson Banda is, I'm sure, a man that's not new to a lot of us in here, Mr. Ruben Lifuka. Mr. Ruben Lifuka is Transparency International Global Vice Chair and a renowned anti-corruption and governance advocate, a chartered environmentalist by profession. He has over 20 years of experience in environmental and development management. Mr. Lifuka is also a researcher and author with specific interests in corruption in the construction and natural resources sectors. Mr. Lifuka also runs a Zambian-based environmental and governance consulting firm called Dry Grind Limited. I hope that's the pronunciation. Mr. Lifuka holds undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in architecture and environmental management. So thank you, sir, for being with us this evening as well. We appreciate you finding the time to join us. Next to Mr. Lifuka is Ms. Pauline Sialumba Mundia, representing the Federation of Small-Scale Miners Association of Zambia. So Ms. Pauline Sialumba Mundia has over 33 years of experience and service in the artisanal and small-scale mining subsector. She was elected as the first president of the Federation of Small-Scale Mining Associations in Zambia in 2008. Ms. Sialumba Mundia has been a recipient of the Presidential Exporters Award in the category of the highest female small-medium entrepreneur exporter of the year. And in 2015, she received the Chamber of Commerce Trade and Industry Award in the category of the Woman Entrepreneur of the Year in the male-dominated mining industry. She is currently serving as the Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Substantive Member on the SADC Regional Coordinating Mechanism in Mines Program. So thank you, Madam, for being with us this evening. We appreciate you making the time. Last but not least, seated next to Ms. Mundia is Ms. Sofani Muzumara, representing the Zambia Association of Manufacturers. So Ms. Sofani Muzumara is currently the coordinator for the Proudly Zambian campaign, a national campaign that is promoting production and consumption of quality local products. She's a creative business development specialist in the manufacturing sector with a passion for sustainability and local content. She has been at the helm of incorporating sustainability in the manufacturing sector through various environmental social governance programs at the Zambia Association of Manufacturers. She is currently pursuing a master's degree in international trade policy and trade law from Lund University with the Trade Policy Training Center in Africa, that's TRAPCA. So Ms. Muzumara has represented Zambia's private sector on various national committees and regional policy dialogue fora. So thank you, Ms. Muzumara, for joining us. We are happy to have you on the panel this evening. So ladies and gentlemen, that is our distinguished panel for this evening. And the reason for constituting this panel in particular is to explore, as has been highlighted by Johannes, the needs, the interests of the private sector to catalyze and strengthen beneficial ownership transparency reform. So with that said then, I'd like to delve straight into our conversation this evening, beginning with Mr. Wilson Banda, representing PACRA. So, Mr. Banda, perhaps in getting us started with the conversation, what we'd like to hear from you is, as far as PACRA is concerned, what has been achieved so far in terms of beneficial ownership transparency in Zambia? Where are we? Also, perhaps as you discuss where we are, you could also highlight the business case of beneficial ownership transparency, as well as where we are going. So where do you see Zambia going as the corporate registry in Zambia? So take it away, Mr. Banda.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. So, with regard to beneficial ownership, the concept of beneficial ownership first came to the agency at around 2015, 2016. And arising from that, in our 2017 Act, Companies Act, we incorporated the concept of beneficial ownership disclosure. So this therefore means that the issue of beneficial ownership disclosure came into being in 2017. Then in 2018, we came up with regulations on how companies will be able to disclose beneficial ownership information. Now, the challenge that arose with the same is that the registry had a challenge. The key stakeholders had a challenge with what this meant. What were we really looking at? What is beneficial ownership disclosure? The narrative has always been that when you incorporate in a company, you look to who the shareholders are, the directors, the company secretary, and that is enough. But now there's this need to go beyond just that and determine who ultimately benefits from the company. Now, this went away or moved away from the concept of what a legal entity is, because the company at law also stands to enjoy certain benefits. So even certain scholars amongst ourselves in Zambia disputed and were not comfortable with that kind of concept. But with a lot of sensitization prior to the enactment of the Companies Act, we were able to convince our stakeholders, and Parliament was happy with our submissions, and the Act came into being. Fast forward to 2018, we have to come up with a system that will be able to not only collect information pertaining to the legal owners of the company, the shareholders. We have to come up with a system of addressing the disclosure of beneficial ownership. Now, at first, it seemed like it would be a simple task. We thought that we'll start off by just merely listing individuals. But what it turned out, especially for the extractives, the mining companies, the big companies, they have such big and complex structures, both locally and abroad, to the extent that when you try and figure out how to disclose or how to capture this information, it turned out to be a challenge. What we have now is a situation where we started looking at the benefits of beneficial ownership. Why should companies disclose this information, as opposed to what are the ramifications for non-disclosure? So our narrative now is to talk about the benefits for everybody. So the biggest benefit is that we operate in a conducive investment climate where it's very competitive and we know exactly who we're dealing with. Because a lot of entities would hide behind having a number of companies in the same sector without disclosing who the natural person is, and you use the number of companies to try and get what you call tenders or procurements. At the end of the day, you find that only the same individuals are benefiting, which is not competitive and stands to frustrate the many businesses that want to thrive in the sector. Insofar as technology is concerned, one thing we've realized is that PACA on its own cannot be able to provide this information. We need other stakeholders. We need civil society. We need financial institutions. We need regulators, so that then we can share this information and confirm that the information we're keeping is accurate and will continue to be accurate. Because it's one thing to have information that is accurate today. It may not be tomorrow. So how do we continuously keep information that is relevant, not only for today, but for tomorrow? I will end there now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bandan. We'll come back to you a little later, but what I'd like to do then is to turn it over to Madam Zuma and just ask, based on what you heard, any opportunities and challenges that you see, and what would that mean for the association and its members going forward, just in terms of just getting this conversation going?
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll just quickly talk about Zambia Association of Manufacturers so that we get the whole picture. So ZAM is representing the manufacturing sector in the country as an apex body. And this representation is firstly policy advocacy and advocating for policies that are conducive for industry. And this is where the beneficial ownership transparency comes in, because the manufacturers who are our members drive the policy, because they're the ones that bring issues to us and point out what is not favoring them in industry. And so us understanding who is driving that policy, the national person driving that policy, is very important, because policies would affect the entire manufacturing sector. So in terms of the association, this is where we come in and are interested in this conversation of beneficial ownership transparency. We are also looking at local content. So as an industry, we are promoting production of quality products and also stimulating the consumption of these quality products through the Proud Zambia campaign. And so as we are advocating for policies, one of the major policies is the local content strategy. And it's mainly about increasing the uptake of local content in different chains, so the mining sector, through the chain stores, through government procurement as well. And when we look at the mining sector, for example, the mines procure about $2 to $4 billion annually, and about 10% of this is going to local manufacturers or local suppliers. And this is what we're trying to do, is to ensure that it's actually going to manufacturers who are producing locally made products, and not just those that are brands. So they are registered in Zambia but are not really Zambia. To go to the comment that Mr. Banda raised of having a national person benefiting from 5 companies. So if we're trying to promote job creation in the country, we're trying to promote economic growth in that Zambians should have these jobs, or should be supplying to these, either the mines or the government or the chain stores. Beneficial ownership transparency is very important, because we get to know who exactly is getting these tenders, get to know exactly who is benefiting from, if say the minerals, or who is benefiting from the manufacturing sector. When we look at the challenges in this is, firstly, the conversation about beneficial ownership transparency is a very new topic in the manufacturing sector, because then it differentiates the legal entity of a company and goes beyond the shareholding, but to the actual national person who is benefiting from this. So already the challenge there becomes an information challenge, a gap in the space. And so because companies are not aware of what the benefits are of being transparent in their ownership structure, that already in itself is a challenge. But of course there is an opportunity, because like has been mentioned, there's an opportunity in being transparent, because when we are collecting say submissions for policy, there will be submissions that from one sector affect another player in that particular sector. So us knowing what's driving this, then because levels the playing field, because we have an understanding of who exactly is pushing that. So from a policy side, it's very important that the manufacturing sector, private sector, joins this conversation and makes the manufacturers and other players out there aware of the benefits of being transparent in their ownership structure. So
Thank you. So what I'm immediately picking up from the conversation, excuse me, is that there's definitely a key role for the private sector to play in advancing this agenda, and I think that's very important, given that it's coming from an industry player, and that's a concept that we're going to play with a little more later. So at this point, Madam Tia, same question, any opportunities and challenges you see for private sector, and particularly for the constituents that you represent? You need assistance with the mic?
Okay, so thank you very much. I think before I answer your question, it's important that the audience should know what the federation is all about. The Federation of North Mining Association of Zambia is actually an apex body for the ASN. And when I say ASN, it's the Artisanal Small Scale Miners. So we have about 18 affiliates throughout the country. These are the regional associations that are all over the country. Some of them are at provincial level, some at district level. And we also have the women in mining who are also our affiliate members, who also have the young women in mining. So the Federation of Small Scale Mining Association, our major role actually is lobbying and advocacy. That is our main role. But then most of the mining activities, like the ASM, when I say ASM, it's Artisanal Small Scale Mining, it is actually considered to be a povertization mining activity. And yet, when you look at it, you realize that the same mining activity, which is considered to be poverty-driven, it could be used as a vehicle for rural economic development if some of the issues are actually addressed. When you talk about challenges, yes, the challenges concerning the beneficial ownership is that a lot of our members, sometimes they become so disparate in mechanizing their operations. Because at the moment, anyone who is in artisanal small-scale mining, it's very difficult to access money. Because small-scale mining is regarded as a risk business venture. So now, out of desperation, whoever comes, to say, I want to invest in your mine and for some money, or I want to sponsor, the members will just, get excited without even realizing where the money is coming from. All they want is to have the operations mechanized. So this is a challenge that is there. They don't know where the source of that money is, whether it is connected to terrorism, whether there is some money laundering, or whether there is some criminality, which they don't know as long as they get their money. So as for the Federation, we are appreciating the beneficial ownership and disclosure, because we believe that this could be used as a vehicle, that could help enhance, due diligence for the SM to be able to know exactly who the people they claim to invest as, what is their background. And once it is done, then you can see a situation whereby our members they will partner with individuals who are credible with integrity. So because that's one thing that we want. Because if they partner with somebody, who have got some cases where they come from, and you are easily affected because you are part of them. So this is an opportunity. Yes, it's an opportunity, but then how does it become an effective opportunity? Because the information is not there. This is a new concept. Something that is new. And also people are very skeptical. They don't know whether it will work for them or it will work against them. So I think that's where we are.
Thank you. Two key points I'm picking up in terms of the benefit of beneficial ownership transparency to artisanal and small-scale miners. One is the issue of due diligence, right? That basically it's good for even small businesses to know who they're getting into business with, and information around beneficial ownership then provides that leverage for small businesses to be able to understand who to do business with, who not to do business with. And tied to that basically then becomes the issue of de-risking operations or even financial transactions. Again, another concept that we'll come back to later, but at this point, Mr. Lifuka, having heard from industry players, having heard from the corporate registry, what then do you think we need to be focusing on? I'll just pause there to allow you to respond, and then I'll follow that up with another question.
Thank you very much. And good evening once again. To start with, just to say to you, Mutali, it's good to have the beautiful photo there. I almost believed a politician who said Lusaka looks like Dubai. I didn't quite recognize that was Lusaka. But let's start from the beginning. Transparency International, as a global movement, has been engaged in this discussion of beneficial ownership for a number of years. And it started with our interest in dealing with issues of dirty money. And dirty money leads to money laundering. As you know, one of the predicate offenses of money laundering is corruption. So when we look at issues of money laundering, just the whole flow of dirty money, one more stop in that is to start putting in place mechanisms to know who the beneficial owners are of different corporate entities. So with that background, I think what I would like to do with your permission, and in my next life, I think I will be a salesman. I'm happy that we have the private sector here, and I want to speak to them on beneficial ownership to move it from the initial focus, which was about countering money laundering and terrorism financing, which probably Mr. Banda may have mentioned could have scared a lot of people that what has beneficial ownership got to do with us when we're not involved in money laundering or terrorism financing. But I think we need to understand that when we have obscure ownership of any company, it enables such entities to become vehicles for illicit activities. It enables these vehicles to be part of corruption schemes, but also such obscure companies can evade tax, can easily evade tax. So when you have anonymous companies, it makes it possible for the real owners really to remain opaque. When you read the Panama Papers, for instance, 140 public officials were said to have owned 214,000 offshore entities. The question that I will pose later on is that what makes us sure that today in Zambia we do not have public officials that actually own mining licenses and are using structures that are not well known? So beneficial ownership information becomes a powerful public tool to combat this anonymity. Because the partner, for instance, will ask for more information than what is provided. But when we talk about benefits, let's look at tax. I talked about tax evasion. With beneficial ownership transparency, tax authorities have an opportunity to fully understand who owns the assets, some of them which are taxable. So there is another benefit that we need to look at. Because beneficial ownership transparency provides the relevant information for authorities to follow up. Similarly, when we look at regulators, let's take the Competition Commission. Because the one to regulate to ensure that you do not have cartels, or predatory pricing, etc. With beneficial ownership, they can know who is the owner of the company and ensure that we do not have bid rigging, which Mr. Banda talked about, whereby whenever you have public tenders, you would have different companies with different names, but ultimately having only one natural person as the ultimate beneficiary. So beneficial ownership goes just beyond what we normally tend to associate it with. It levels the playing field. It improves competition in business. But you also have entities that ordinarily will not be captured in the conversation such as this. And these are businesses and professional entities like lawyers. We normally call them gatekeepers. Lawyers, accountants, real estate agents. Beneficial ownership transparency with accurate data enables them to undertake appropriate due diligence of their clients. Because in the absence of beneficial ownership information, you could sell land to a person who really is not the ultimate beneficiary, but buying for on behalf of other persons. But for businesses as well, when it comes to corporate governance, beneficial ownership transparency enables companies to undertake due diligence of those that sit on their boards, those that want to be shareholders. As Ms. Mutia was saying, if you have beneficial ownership information, it can enable you to undertake the necessary vetting of your potential investors or members of the board. But the private businesses of the private sector can also vet their suppliers. They can vet their vendors. They can get the entire supply chain to ensure that they know who the natural owners of whatever they are working with is. But we also need to understand, Student Director, with your indulgence, that how then is this information captured? This information is captured through beneficial ownership registers. Usually these registers are run by government, and in this case, BACRA is going to be playing an important role in running this registry or register. Except to mention that there are multiple registers already, because BACRA is not the only one that's collecting beneficial ownership information. If I take the mining cadastre, they should also be collecting beneficial ownership information. If you take ZPPA, for those that are registered with ZPPA, the Zambia Public Procurement Authority, they should ideally be collecting beneficial ownership information. So some of the challenges, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this in the next round, just to mention that we need to find a way of ensuring that there is interconnection between the different registers. But also, we have to ensure that the information collected is accurate. We have to ensure that the information is accessible. This is important for civil society and journalists in the room, because access to such information, access to such public information, can enable us to investigate wrongdoing. Let's say the public tender, where we suspect that there could be bid rigging. If we have access to this information, it can enable us to do our advocacy for journalists, it can enable them to do their investigative stories, etc. Lastly, it's about audit authorities. Audit authorities can also benefit from the presence of beneficial ownership registers, because then, even when they are undertaking their work, they do have an extra layer of information which will come from the beneficial ownership registers. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Lifuka. I think that's very important. What I'd particularly like to underscore from everything that you've said is perhaps let's begin to think about changing the narrative, to not focus on the negative connotation usually attached to beneficial ownership transparency, which is that we're basically trying to fight financial and economic crime. And usually that's what we hear from corporate registries when you begin to interrogate, why are you doing this? It's about complying with international standard-setting bodies such as the Financial Action Task Force that says to effectively fight money laundering or combat or counter terrorist financing, this is what you need to do, and therefore countries should be able to then toe this line. But I think, like you rightly said, the conversation should perhaps begin to be balanced with what's in it for business. Why should businesses want to support this agenda, which is why the private sector then is in the room. So, Mr. Banda, then, with everything that's been highlighted, what we know is that particularly for companies that were incorporated perhaps 2018 onwards, because the law and the regulations were in place at the time, we have, and I could be making assumptions here, fairly high compliance because you couldn't incorporate a company or legal arrangement without declaring beneficial owners. But what we know is that there's been very little or low compliance in terms of companies that were incorporated before the law was introduced. And so the question then I'd like to pose is, why do you think that has been the case? And on the part of FACRA, what initiatives have been taken to ensure that companies, corporate entities, legal arrangements comply with the need to declare beneficial owners, having understood from the different submissions made by panelists why it's important, why it's good for our country in terms of enhancing corporate transparency, accountability, fighting corruption, but also that it's ultimately good for business.
Thank you. So, with regards issues of compliance, first of all, we have a number of compliance requirements at hand. So the first is for a company to file annual returns, which is a document that speaks to the fact that a company is in existence, and it also serves to confirm and verify the details of the company. The second is to do with the minimum capital. That in itself has been challenged, and the mechanisms that we use to try and compare companies to compliance, we're using the same mechanism, which I'll speak to. Now, in terms of percentage, roughly from the last time that we checked, looks like 50% of the companies are non-compliant, especially for those that were incorporated prior to 2018. We need to run another script to determine whether that has gone up, but I want to believe that has gone up. Now, what are we doing about it? The easiest would be to deregister entities that are non-compliant. That is what traditional registry would do. So they'll issue out a notice and possibly give a period in which to comply. If non-compliance, that is done. But that really will not work well because there are a number of factors. One of them is the fact that a lot of companies are not aware that there's need for beneficial ownership disclosure. And even if they are aware, because they don't understand the narrative, the fact that they're not bothered with money laundering or financing of terrorism, and it's a different world for them, they will not bother. So therefore, the best way to deal with it is to speak about the benefits, or rather compel them to comply. The first thing that we have done is to ensure that under the new Act, every form that requires a change to a company will have a provision for beneficial ownership disclosure. So if you're filing a return, you will still be required to provide beneficial ownership disclosure if you haven't done it. If you've done, it's an opportunity for you to confirm whether what you disclosed is accurate or the same. So we have forms such as transfer of shares, annual return filings, we have forfeiture of shares, surrender of shares. We use that particular platform to encourage companies to comply. The second thing that we've done is we have a system online where any person can check whether a particular company exists. Now, when you go online and you search for a company, it will confirm whether the company does exist. But apart from that, it will also provide information on its compliance status. It starts with annual returns, the nominal capital, it also will tell you whether a company is compliant insofar as beneficial ownership disclosure is concerned. I will encourage the audience to take time to just do that. It falls under a particular tab known as business verification, so you can check. So that's one big way of undertaking some form of due diligence on a company. So we call it, not publicly, but privately, it's a name and shame. So if you're not compliant, it will show the public information. The third is we have a number of MOUs with a number of regulators and key stakeholders. One of them that I can speak to is ZPPA. There's now a requirement that for any public procurement, we need to know who, the company needs to disclose beneficial ownership information. Without that, we will not be able to deal with the government, but also any procurement entity under the government. So the idea is to encourage companies to comply because they will not be able to conduct any business. The third is we're trying to avoid fronting and also the issue of local content. There's a fear that even if on a particular day a company may comply, but after complying, the question is, will they not change the details so much so that the beneficial owners ultimately change after the fact? So yes, there are all those challenges that are there, but what we are planning to do and we are working on is to share information electronically, have a data exchange so that at any particular point, someone can verify and check the status of a company to confirm that what they did disclose at a particular time continues to be the same case unless otherwise. Thank you.
Just a repeated question based on what you said. So you mentioned that you have an MOU with the ZPPA, which is the Zambia Public Procurement Agency, that requires companies bidding for tenders to declare that beneficial owners. Did I hear that correctly?
So actually, it's not even an MOU. Initially, it's actually in the law. It's part of the law. So it's just that how do we implement this law? How do we verify how is it done? That is what we're working on.
And therein lies my follow-up question, which is that, so do these companies actually declare beneficial owners? And what I can imagine you're going to say is, they probably do, but there's no verification. And I ask particularly because one can guess that you have a number of politically exposed persons that have different entities and bid for public tenders, right? Whereas if they are not declared as beneficial owners, there's no way to determine that. So I'm just trying to get a sense of, in terms of background, working with ZPPA, how are you working together to ensure that those declared are actually the beneficial owners and not fictitious people?
In terms of verification, there are a number of ways of determining verification. So we have, because we hold information on companies. So if a company declares that it's another shareholder in another company and the ultimate beneficiary is this person, we can use our system to verify. In terms of PEPs, that's a different story because we don't hold that information. In terms of entities outside Zambia, for some of the jurisdictions, they have platforms where they disclose beneficial owners. We're able to verify that. But those instances where it's difficult to determine independently, and therefore you will rely on what is submitted by the company. So the issue of verification is a challenge and will continue to be a challenge until such time that we can have an independent and systematic way of verifying. When it comes to the information that we provide, most of it, of course, comes from the clients themselves, and we have to rely on that. And so verification, I think, is continues to be a challenge, and it's something that we feel can only work if we stop being a single registry for beneficial ownership information. the push is to have a multi-sectorial or I'll call it multi-registry kind of platform for beneficiary information, so that other players, as has been said, can feed into that information. Yes, we'll get your information. Yes, we will not question because we're not able to question information. But the minute you go to, for example, a bank, the minute you go to another regulator, you will provide that information because it's compelled to, and therefore will be able to confirm and verify. So that's the approach that a number of countries are taking, such as the Philippines, Belgium, and we're hoping that we can possibly use that kind of platform to enhance PO disclosure. Thank you.
Okay. Perhaps before I pose my next question, let me give an opportunity to any one of the panelists to respond to any of the issues highlighted by Mr. Banda, if there's any. I see Mr. Rifuka is itching for the microphone. Yes, madam. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll just talk briefly about, just comment on the name and shame strategy. So in 2021, there was a need for ZAM to start producing policy or advocating for policy based on evidence. And so we needed to start collecting data from the manufacturers, and part of this data was on the shareholding, and now I would say the transparency in the ownership of the companies. And what we've seen in industry is that the strictness of getting information or the penalties do not necessarily work for industry, and this has been seen through the Revenue Authority or in standards regulations, for example. And this is why we're starting to see the amnesty and the more friendly-based regulations, because from the industry side, it's a very competitive space, and they're very hesitant in producing information because they think that the next company may want to get information that would affect that particular business. And so from the manufacturing side, the approach that we recommend to take, or the one that we really push for, is an incentive-based. So why would they need to provide this information? What benefit is it to them? And I like what Mr. Banda had talked about working with ZPPA, because then at that point when they need to submit a tender, they need to bid for it, then that comes in, and there's then a need for them to produce that information. So that's just wanted to echo that that's the way that works for industry. And also the need for it to be a smooth process, because of course the administrative burden, the administration, the paperwork of submitting all of this information, getting the information together, becomes an administrative burden, and the industry loses money and time. And so a comment there would be that the process is smoother in them submitting this information, because then it's more voluntarily than it being a burden to business. That's it.
I just want to comment on the challenge of information. I totally agree with Mr. Banda that the beneficial ownership, transparency is a new concept. It is something that will take a long time for people to understand. But I just want to give the example of our sub-sector. Most of our members are in the rural areas. So it is important that partners should find it necessary to identify partners to work with. Partners who are able to reach out to the people that need information. Because many times when we talk about information, we say, okay, the information is there. But then the most important thing is how to access that information. Because if you don't access the information, then how can you act on it if it's not there? So we have to find a mechanism that is very effective, which will make it possible that the information is able to reach out to the need. Because there will be instances whereby you are charged penalties for something that you are not aware of. And then we are told that you are not compliant. And yet you have not received the information. So it is important that you have to come up with something that is effective for the information to reach out. And then something that should take a bit of time. Because this, as the background just rushed into, giving out those penalties, then people will not even appreciate, the whole concept. But then as the federation, I would say that we are there to partner with partner, because we are the key players in this subsector of ASM, and it will be very easy for us to disseminate the information to our members because we are part of them.
It almost feels like Mr. Pine is in the firing line, but used to. Well, I think the challenge that Parker faces, and I'm sure Mr. Pine will agree to that, is that the Financial Action Task Force recommendations requires that the register contains really accurate, accessible, and verified information. That's the starting point. So the question therefore is, are we doing ourselves any favors the fact that we introduced BO requirements in the Companies Act, and yet when we look at the architecture of implementing this, we are still at a point where we're not getting accurate information that can also be verified. So the institutional capacity of BACRA comes into the picture, and that's where my worry is. If BACRA takes on the command and control legislation, they will have to show capacity to ensure that what they ask for by the business community is enforced. And yet they don't have a presence in all the districts, and they don't have their own limitation, etc. Even when it comes to verifying using other registries, for instance, the deeds registry at the Ministry of Lands, or tax registry, property rates, the mining license, or any other registry, they're equally either not complete or not verified. So we have to really think through innovatively as to how do we undertake this verification. And I like the suggestion of not having a single register, because the onus then will be on paper. And we know that this may not really work out effectively. So do we learn from other entities that have multiple registers? Do we build a whole program around beneficial ownership transparency? My worry, and this is a worry that we have as CSOs, that we've introduced a good thing, but we do not have a program to back it up. So we keep rolling it out in phases and rather sporadically. Can we come up with a comprehensive program that allows us to roll out beneficial ownership transparency regime in this country in a manner that will indeed provide immediate benefits?
Thank you. A number of follow-up questions I have, but also I recognize a lot of our participants have a full day of work. So I just want to, at this point, bring them into the conversation. Ideally, this should have come at the end, just so that there's that engagement happening. So I don't know if at this point we have any questions from the audience. Perhaps I can start with Robert over there. Do you have a mic that can roll in the audience for questions?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert. I work with Transparency International from the Secretariat. I mean, first, very happy that I'm able to be part of this, and I'd love to say thank you very much for the distinguished panelists for such interactive and engaging conversations. And I think it paints very much the picture and the sort of debacle we have in terms of how do we operationalize beneficial ownership transparency. And I think it's interesting to get the different perspectives. One, we're looking at administrative components of what it means to actually bring it in force. We're looking at industry this is what is relevant to our members, as far as, for example, what does compliance cost look like for getting the register up and running. But then the sector approach really is also very crucial, because it tells you something about why certain sectors would be driven towards the enactment of the beneficial ownership registry. And I think it goes back also to Transparency International Zambia, when they're saying, we have been working on this for quite a while, and it is very important things that we have. Some of the questions that have been raised, for instance, for me, resonant. So one, the incentives approach to it. It's a very interesting approach in terms of how we create and generate value and benefits for the community. But for me, there's something question that we need to be asked. So one, we've seen countries like Ghana, who have said the threshold should be 5% of ownership. Now that's a country context that suits specific jurisdiction, and I think that should be the approach, which seems like the approach that Zambia is taking in terms of what works where we are. And I think that's a very important question. And I think the role of administration is also crucial. So we've seen the failures of voluntary compliance. We've seen a number of schemes that have come to say, we will do this on our own, but without some form of sanction, then there's a breakdown. There's a breakdown, or there's a failure of the system. So this whole of government approach is a very important aspect in my view. This is backed by an integrated information system. How do we get different people to speak and therefore to verify? For me, it would be how we build on some of those things. So as an initial reaction, I think the conversations are fantastic, but we need to be very deliberate in terms of how we get everyone around the table to speak from within and reflecting on our context about the same thing in advance, because we've seen the benefits far outweigh some of the costs. But how we move the needle, and moving that needle starts with bringing the different individuals that are within this group. So how is government speaking to CSO, who's speaking to professional employees, who's speaking to sector players, who's speaking to academia. One challenge that throw out, for instance, to transparency and EITI and CIP, how do we create this knowledge among the people that have to implement this beneficial ownership register? Because the one thing that has sort of come out is it's a new concept. We're trying to figure it out. But there are people who have worked on it, who have continued to engage with this. What then is the society doing in terms of advancing this conversation? Thank you.
I was going to ask for more questions, but because that was a mouthful, I'll allow for the panel to respond. But also, as a rider to that submission by Robert, and it was actually a good segue into the question I had, so I might as well just ask it, is that he highlighted that this issue of voluntary compliance seems to be a challenge. And we know that for PACRA, as Mr. Banda highlighted in his opening remarks, the issue is balancing this idea of, there should be compliance with the law versus we are trying to promote investment, we're trying to make it easy to do business. So we don't want to crack the whip, if I may put it that way, so that there's compliance. So what then should happen for companies to comply? So that's the question, and it's for everyone. What then should happen for companies to comply? So I'll allow for the panel to respond, but again, I'm reminded to acknowledge those that are joining us online via live stream. You're welcome to this conversation. I would encourage that if there are any questions for those of us joining online, please post the question on the live chat, and then I think it can be posted to the panel, just so that the live audience as well is interacting with the panel. So please take it away, panel. I don't know who wants to start.
Thank you. That's a $1 million question. What should happen? So the whole point here is we're trying to promote businesses, at least from our end. And course, in promoting businesses, we want them to be transparent, we want them to add to the tax basket, to have as many employees as possible, free employment, so to say. And so, providing incentives or enabling them to function without any hindrances is part of our goal. But yet, on the flip side, there are these strict requirements, and one of them now is the fact that they need to disclose who the beneficial owners are. And like you rightfully said, under FATIC, I think for Zambia it's Zambia, there are these requirements as a member state that we comply with beneficiarship disclosure. And one of them, one of the issues that they ask for is what's the compliance level? Are you imposing sanctions for companies that are not compliant? Can you show us examples of cases that you've taken to court where directors or shareholders or such persons have been prosecuted? That's another angle. We choose not to use that angle, but we believe that with having dialogue, with engaging stakeholders, there will be this voluntary compliance that will still satisfy the many stakeholders that require us to ensure that beneficial disclosure is there. So yes, we're driving the agenda for another angle, which is to encourage businesses to comply. If they do not comply, they will not have this incentive of getting business with the government, or rather the regulator will not renew their license for the subsequent year, which will affect their business. Therefore, as part of the compliance requirements, they need to do that. That is the angle that we choose to take, and that is what I think should happen. Thank you.
I'm keen to hear from private sector. What must happen? Madam Muzumara, perhaps can start.
Well, you just say what should happen. So even from the private sector, I think that's what should happen. Sanctions for private manufacturing would not work. So he just really laid out the plan of what should happen, especially when they're trying to get business either from the government or renewing their license or something that is a need for their business. I think that's where the information can be sought out. And an example of the evidence, the data that we're trying to collect as ZAM, it's also at the point of renewal, membership renewal. Then they ask for information. What is the shareholding change in the company? What else changed in the company's operations or in the company's structure? And at that point, then some of this information is submitted, but also to the new members of the association, because then this information, the questions are part of the application form. So then companies, because they want to join them, they want to get the benefits of the association, then they start to submit the information. And I think this is what Mr. Banda mentioned for the companies that have been registering as of 2018, is that some of this information, the compliance levels are higher. So I think he has laid out the plan of what should happen.
I'm guessing, Madam India, you agree? So we can turn it over to Mr. Mfuka.
Moderator jumped myself because CSOs are not business. I think that what should happen is what we stated right at the beginning. Let's change the narrative. Companies should not comply with beneficial ownership disclosure because they are afraid of sanctions. Companies should comply with beneficial ownership disclosure because it is good for business. businesses themselves should realize that with beneficial ownership disclosure, you can identify illicit actors in your sector. You can also ensure that there is fair competition when it comes to you participating in public procurement, that you're getting the right public investment, even for threats to strategic sectors, whether it is energy, telecommunications, defense. You're not getting hostile actions from persons you cannot even identify. So the businesses should see this really as something good for them. Therefore, the value proposition should be one that is driven by the private sector themselves. Because if this is just about compliance, then we're going to what we call the salami tactics. You just got just below the requirements of the regulation, just to tick the box. But I think even when companies sit like now, the whole conversation about ESG, environment, social, and governance issues, if any company is going to make voluntary reporting based on ESG, having the mutual ownership registers in place helps them to do that. So in my view, we have to change the narrative. And that's why I'm saying we need to develop a whole program around this to create awareness among the private entities, but also to create awareness among CSOs, the media, etc. Because then they can also hold to account the private sector or the business community that do not want necessarily to provide information. So I think that we need to think a little bit more creatively around this. Because if it's just sanction-driven, we've got a number of sanction-driven schemes that have not achieved much success. Thank you.
I totally agree with him. I think it is an issue of mindset. Because when we hear beneficial ownership transparency, a lot of companies or a lot of individuals will think something that is going against them. But then when we have that mindset to say it will work for me, it is to my advantage, then I can see that people will they will comply very quickly because they know that it's working for them. So to start with, we really have to appreciate it, change your mindset to say this is for me, it's what I can see.
Would it be fair then to say that part of the reasons for why we are where we are in terms of compliance would be one, that it's an issue of this narrative that we're talking about that is largely been negative. And then secondly, what I've been getting is the issue of awareness on the part of entities as well, that perhaps there's no or little awareness around what the law actually requires. So I just want to just get a sense of whether we are agreeing that largely those are the reasons for why we are where we are in terms of compliance. The notes are sufficient, so I just want to quickly read out two questions that came from our viewers or listeners online. So one is coming from Collins Mumba, and the question is, how can community voices be amplified to advance transparency in Zambia? Because fighting for transparency seems to be for the elite, and what role does it play in enhancing much needed democracy in Zambia? I don't know if I need to repeat the question. So basically, the gist of the question is, how can community voices be amplified in this agenda? But also, what is the accrued benefit to advancing the cause for democracy in Zambia? That's my understanding of the question. But allow me to read out the second question so that I can allow for the panel to respond to both questions. The second question is coming from Frederick Roy Pew, and the question is, how do we effectively actualize beneficial ownership data in light of the past failures to actualize the access to information bill, as well as the limitations in people openly declaring or registering their assets with the collateral registry and background? Fact question, but I hope Mr. Wanda, sorry to put you back on the spot. This sounds like a question for you. Did you get the question, perhaps, Mr. Wanda? So the question is, how do we effectively actualize beneficial ownership data in light of the past failures to actualize the access to information bill, as well as the limitations in people openly declaring or registering their assets with the collateral registry at background? Again, just my understanding of the question, especially the first part of it, is basically this particular individual is trying to reconcile the need for beneficial ownership data versus access to information, and that access to information still remains a problem for Zambia. So how do we reconcile those two? I think that's what this person is asking. I hope I'm not imagining things, but that's what it sounds like.
Thank you. So with regards to beneficial ownership information, the information is available to the public. So your information is available to the public. The only issue that we have is that it's available at a fee. So you will have to spend some money to get this information. Now this is for the public. For certain institutions, the information is free because they use it for sales purposes and we give it out for free. Most of these are law enforcement agencies and other partners that we have an agreement with. So the debate really is whether the information should be for free. You can access it for free. So what we've done is just to provide information pertaining to companies and whether they're compliant or not compliant in terms of pure disclosure. So far as this is concerned, I don't think there's an issue with access to information. This information is available. You can access online and once the payment is made, it's, the person is requesting for the same to get it. The other issue of assets and the collateral registry, I think there's a mismatch there. The collateral registry really deals with the use of movable assets to access credit and to place the same as collateral. So the creditor or lender acquires the security interest in that property. It's not a registry where you go and declare your assets and you register them there. We actually do provide sensitization and awareness on both pure disclosure as well as the non-registry. But the challenge that we have is that for a number of institutions, such as the ones which are in far-flung areas, we are yet to get there, and we continue to do so with our partners. EITI, Open Ownership, have been very supportive, and together we've managed to reach a lot of stakeholders. So the idea is to reach the associations, and through the associations to be able to channel the information or the awareness that we want to pass on to the end users. So it's something that we are very passionate about and we will continue to do. Thank you.
So the rest of the panel, perhaps you can focus on the question around community voices. How do we make this a fight that includes the communities?
Well, I think Mr. Baker has just made reference to this. We need to work with the community structures, but we need to also work with the media, the community radio stations, etc. We need to package this information for the community's benefit. But I think we need to just go beyond using very high sounding terms, as you rightly said. So what is beneficial ownership and how does that relate to a person out there in the community? So we need to find a good way of communicating this information. So community outreach will depend on what CSOs are doing, the media are doing, business associations, chambers of commerce, etc. Who can all play a role in reaching out to the communities. But also allow the community members to take interest. There are a number of activities out there which PACRA or any of these government agencies have in place, and at times there is a bit of apathy. So we have to encourage communities to take interest.
just to re-echo what has been said and also to tap into the community. The Zambian community really likes to know things. They'll tell you that this is where this one stays. They'll tell you that, so they like to know all of this information. And if we're going to move away from it being a conversation of the elite, but going into the community masses, is that we tap into what they already like to know, because they like to know business information, they like to know this kind of information, and so we interpret the jargons of the beneficial ownership transparency into something that is already in the way of life, whether it's from the transporters or just the normal business people. Then they get to push and demand for this ownership, because they'd like to know, for example, who owns the manufacturing company. They'd like to know all of this information, and so I think, as has been said, working with the media, but also translating this information to the community and just tapping into the way of life of Zambia.
Thank you. So I'd like at this point to turn it back to our audience. Any questions from anyone in the audience? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can have that as the first round, or the second round in this case, of questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Joseph Zara from Action 8. I'm trying to summarize my questions. Mr. Banda, you highlighted the challenges you have to establish who are the real owners, especially for multinational corporations. My question is, do you, are you in partnership with institutions like financial intelligence sector? I think it will be of paramount importance to help, especially establishing who are the real owners. And I wish to use this platform to share experiences, especially from the institution. I'm sure you heard the Mazabuka saga, which Action 8 has did highlight the illicit behavior that was happening, where Zambia lost a colossal sum of amounts which would have benefited the country, especially in various sectors such as education. So maybe just to be sure to highlight and emphasize that there's need for collaboration even beyond the country at regional and global level. The second one goes to Madam Musumana. You've highlighted the initiative and also the intervention to ensure that Zambian companies are benefiting. But I just wanted to find out if you have a deliberate policy, for example, that promotes women and youth entry into the supply. Because as you know, that lack of capital may be a limiting factor. Maybe you can highlight if there are any benchmarks that would promote, for example, youths participating in the market. And maybe if there are any, the last one, maybe Madam Mundia, is there any place where these more miners are trading, a trading place? Because that has been challenged. They will do the mining, but where are they trading from? I think that has been really the question. I had several questions that I think I'll end here. Thank you.
So I think we can have 2 more questions, but just ask that please let's keep our questions to the theme of this discussion so that we are not digressing.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Santa Solomon Mansa, and I represent the Solomon Trust Initiative. The FATF guidance on transparency and beneficial ownership states that FATF recommendations recognize these different mechanisms that we put in place to provide flexibility for countries to implement the requirements in a manner that corresponds with their legal, regulatory, economic, and cultural characteristics. Now, as Madam Uzma, if I put your name correctly, stated, Zambians are thirsty for information. So I feel strongly that getting to participate more in private dialogue and to participate at events where you're asked to come and speak, I think is also very important, such as this, and inviting more community-based approaches towards that. So I wanted to find out what other platforms have you lined up, such as these, to communicate this information to the public. Thank you.
Sanjeev Nayak from Cuts International. Very interesting debate on the subject. Since it's a new topic, we have done a lot. I would like to learn from our experts, especially from Center for International Private Enterprises, to understand the societal benefit in countries where we implemented this program. Because we are quite new in terms of implementing. There are countries which are quite advanced in doing this. Perhaps we could give us, that would give us confidence in terms of implementing that. The second aspect is, like, from a perspective of small and medium enterprises. I'm just thinking around how, in the country there are so many small and medium enterprises. Many a times, small businesses or the same owners set up a couple of businesses due to tax benefit. Let's say we have the turnover tax benefits. It is, 800,000 much up to that you have turnover tax. So instead of you graduating to a bigger company, they set up a couple of companies. So those who, set up or operate in that environment, how do they have this? Because, this information, you have the fear of that you disclose all this information, and then how you can go against you, from the business perspective. And, after disclosing this information that you have 5 companies, they all are small, but you end up all this, you become big, then you will be asked to, migrate or graduate to the next level. These are some of the things which is practical examples. The third is about the threshold. I don't believe that small companies, working for those who have the turnover of 300, 400,000, small amount, they should be this. Because by looking at the explanation you have given, it is for corporate. That is how it is. You are looking at big things. Money laundering, and all those sort of competition, drinking and all those. So these are not done by small players. And can we not have that approach of giving threshold, okay? You are up to this threshold, then you are not supposed to comply with that. It is for companies of certain size. I think that would be, and we talked about carrot and stick approach. Okay, when you go to SMEs with that, it's better to have this that approach, looking at the scale of the business. Thank you very much.
Perhaps you could respond to those questions, and then we'll take another round of questions.
Thank you. There's a question on collaboration with stakeholders, arising from the fact that it's quite challenging to verify certain disclosures. I can confirm that we have an MOU with the Financial Intelligence Center. We have a team that is actually in Arusha now with the FIC, attending some meetings. I think it's this week. It should end next week, to do with similar issues. So we have this working relationship. But apart from that, we also rely on other registries. We are aware that certain registries have open registers where you can just key in and it will give you information on beneficial ownership. So we utilize that to try and ensure that we verify as much information as possible when it comes to beneficial ownership disclosure. Quite recently, we're hoping to have an MOU with CIPC, which is the Companies and Intellectual Property Commission of South Africa, where we'll be sharing information on companies from South Africa as well as ourselves. That has been cleared by the Attorney General, but we're just finalizing. The idea is to try and get first-hand information from these jurisdictions, so that then we can compare with what we're getting at the point of submission that will become a form of verification. And I think, unless I'm wrong, the company in question as well, from South Africa would also fall in such a scenario where we want to pull data directly from the registry in South Africa. So these are some of the mechanisms or strategies that we're working on in enhancing the registry. But as been said, this is still not enough. There's still more that can be done. There are a lot of stakeholders that have very valuable information that could assist in verifying this information. And this is why I think in the long run, hopefully very soon, we should have a multi-pronged registry where different stakeholders, different regulators can provide input and query the registry when the information is not as should be. Regarding what other platforms do we use to communicate to the public? So the agency has an ongoing awareness and sensitization campaign where we generally talk about companies, registration, intellectual property rights. We use that opportunity to talk about beneficial ownership disclosure. We also have the same information on our website. We now have a Q&A session on beneficial ownership. So there's a question and then it's answered, and how do you disclose? What forms do you use? When is it done? Is there an example? We provide all that on our website. And also we have once in a while some postings on Facebook to talk about beneficial ownership disclosure. So the idea is to provide as much awareness as possible. The other question that I may speak to is about small companies. Now, when it comes to small companies, of course, there's what is known as a risk assessment. So you undertake a risk assessment to determine which sectors have the highest risk in terms of corruption, in terms of illicit flows, financial flows, in terms of tax evasion. And so when this is done, you can determine which sectors not really to bother much on in terms of whether the information is accurate. So if you have, for example, the traders, the small players, yes, they will disclose, but you will not really bother much because half the time the information they provide is really accurate because they will not have any other person behind the legal person. So in short, the beneficial owner is the legal owner. Stops there. It's the larger companies that start to do this as they avoid tax or use other, trying to get into other schemes, and that is where problems start. So a risk assessment is something that needs to be done. It's something that we're working on. I think those are the questions that I believe I could answer. Thank you.
Yes, for any of the questions that you feel pertain to you, please.
I'll just quickly touch on the question on the women and the youth. So the manufacturing sector is a well-dominated industry, but what Zambia is doing is we're trying to encourage women-led manufacturing entities as well as women-founded manufacturing entities, and we have different programs that focus on manufacturing. For instance, tomorrow and Friday, we are having a women in industry training and tour just to bring in more women manufacturers or more players in the industry. Similar to the youth, we are also looking at having more young people join the manufacturing space.
Thank you.
Let me answer the question.
Sure.
He asked me a question concerning utility. How do our members trade their minerals? At the moment, I would say that there is no existing marketing mechanism for our members to sell their products. So most of our members actually they're ripped off because they sell to the middlemen, or I would say the brokers. And occasionally some of our members who are able to travel to attend trade fairs outside the country, and they are able to do that. But the majority of our members who don't have the capacity to travel out, I would say that people they sell locally, and I would say that they get almost nothing. But the government is in the process of coming up with a marketing mechanism so that we can sell our products.
I don't have an answer, but I have a question from Mr. Rangi. The last time we didn't finish this conversation, so I'm hoping this time around Mr. Rangi can help us hear this issue. This has to do with state-owned enterprises. So we know that there are a number of Chinese state-owned enterprises that have come into this country. They have undertaken projects, say, funded by the Chinese government. They have now registered local companies with power. So I'm sure you remember my question last time. So who's the natural person behind that state-owned enterprise that is registered here in Zambia? How do we navigate around that? Secondly, you said you can access beneficial ownership information at a fee. Assuming when I access that information, I notice that the beneficiary is not really the owner of this company. It's just been put there. What mechanism do I have to challenge the accuracy of that information?
So before you respond to that question, Mr. Banda, what I'd like to propose is a last round of questions, if there are any from the audience, so that they can be taken collectively. And then afterwards, we can go into concluding remarks, because I realize we are running out of time. It's still a long day for a lot of people tomorrow, so I just want to allow for people to go and rest before another busy day tomorrow. So any questions from the audience? Yes, we have two. So we'll start with the lady.
Thank you very much. Maybe even more than a comment than a question, but I'm sure that especially Parker could help us with that. Number one, I think we seem to have a kid glove when it comes to regulation, and unless we are not convinced, then we start negotiating for compliance. I seem to have a feeling that you are taking a negotiation to compliance approach, other than saying this is good for the economy, this is good for the country, then let's do it. You can give a time frame, which is fair. You can say after 1 year or 2 years, everybody must comply. I'm not hearing that from you. But also, naturally for companies, I don't think that should be a very big problem. And especially for the SMEs, or should I say especially for local companies, especially owned by citizens, right? It starts becoming complicated as you go up. And the multinationals and everybody else, and those are the people you're negotiating with, really. Because then the beneficial owners are out there, and some of them don't even want to be known that they are partners of some of these companies. And obviously it gets complicated at that level. But thirdly, if you go into South Africa, for example, and if we had implemented the CEC to the fullest, this would have already taken care of 50% of the problems. Because within CEC, if we had implemented all the pillars, we would then actually be saying who has control, who is the owner of this company, so that even if we give preferences through our ZPA Act, we know that we're giving our citizens. And these citizens are actually known. But we haven't fully implemented that, and obviously that's why we are where we are, where we have to keep asking people to do it. But for the private sector, and especially if you go the incentive route that you just talked about, and if you're going to tie it to procurement, for example, then they actually start seeing the benefit of them having their companies registered fully and ownership actually declared as such. But I think the biggest threat for the private sector is when you actually declare some of these issues, and these are big politics, and then the politicians decide to start hounding people, then these businesses would have no chance when we change government to government in terms of business. And so it doesn't create a consistent environment for them. And I think that is some of those issues that will prevent them coming forward and telling you who the owners of the companies. So maybe the biggest question is, why would they reject that? If we start from that and answer those questions and address them, then maybe I think we'll get there faster than what we're doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Nicholas Kashama from the Tony Blair Institute. Very good conversation that we have here, and I echo the sentiment around the beneficial ownership conversation should rather be around the benefit, unlike the sanctions. But one thing that is very important is the verification of the natural person, because if that piece is not really taken care of, then garbage in, garbage out, to Mr. Ifuka's point as well. I just wanted to find out from Mr. Banda if, in terms of the journey to make sure that they enforce verification of the natural person, they are considering the INRIS system owned by the Ministry of Home Affairs, because that is the true source of identifications for citizens as well as visitors. That can be a good start. And if really that strategy is adopted across governments to make sure that there's only one source of entry, then verification then becomes everyone's responsibility and enables also that dynamic element within the beneficial ownership registry that PAPRA is. So my question is just around what that roadmap looks like, and perhaps if that specific system is considered. Thank you.
We have another question here, Tita.
Thank you. Good evening. My question is directed at Mr. Banda, unfortunately for you. First of all, kudos for all the work you're trying to do in terms of identifying who owns what. But I would like to draw your attention to the underground economy that is neither regulated nor taxed. I was reading an article by the World Economics in their quarterly informal economy publication. And they say Zambia's informal sector, the people you are not registered, at 38% of our GDP, PPP, the purchasing power parity, 38%, which in dollar value is 42 billion. These are the people who are not registered with PAPRA. They do business in Zambia. They are almost half of our economy. We do not know who they are, because obviously they are, first of all, not registered with you. So we can't even start searching for the beneficiary. My question is, what are you doing about bringing that underground economy to the surface? These $42 billion they're talking about is good money, considering what we are borrowing as a country. Shouldn't we get I think if their corporate tax was 4%, we wouldn't need to borrow. So I just want your reaction as to what, in fact, the whole government is doing about reaching out to the informal sector that do not pay tax. And also another fun fact, they actually employ 90% of workers in Zambia. So we actually do not know these people who employ 90% of the labor force of this country. So just a reaction.
Mr. Banda, seeing as you're in the firing line.
best practice is that the minute you identify it as a state-owned enterprise, and there's no dispute, then you will have to deviate the fact that the financial person as a beneficiary. So once it's determined that a particular government is outsourced one of these entities, that is disclosure. In other jurisdictions, I believe in India, they have come up with some amendments which speak to this. So for SOEs, it's established that government and with regards to information that is not accurate and it's found out that it's inaccurate, the person can write to the registrar providing evidence that the information is inaccurate. The registrar has powers to summon or question the company to confirm or rather to show proof as to why the information that is provided is false, and so that the registrar will take that information. But if it found that it is false, the act provides that the company and its directors can be prosecuted for providing fraudulent or inaccurate information to the registry. So the provisions which speak to the fact that the state officers can be actually penalized and there's a fine as well as imprisonment for providing wrong information to the registry. That is the root. There was a question on I may use the same phrase, kid gloves to companies in terms of compliance. We're looking at the fact that beneficial ownership is a new concept. And unfortunately, it's not a new concept to the layperson. We've had seasoned corporate lawyers challenge the fact that this is not what we do. So, in terms of awareness, there's a lot to learn, including ourselves. This is what I started when I made my opening remarks. So, our approach is to give as much time as possible to companies to comply. The other issue is that we want to come up with simpler systems so that companies can file their declarations online with a lot of ease. Once we have that in place, then now we can consider taking a more drastic measure in terms of penalizing companies that are not compliant. The issue of CEC and the thresholds, I think that came much earlier before the issue of beneficial ownership kicked in. But the way it is now, with the issue of local content, I think we are appreciating the fact that beneficial ownership will now play a part, and that information will be heavily utilized. I'm talking of a local company or a Zambian company. Verification of a natural person with the iris. So we are one of the agencies that were involved in the development as well as the rollout of the same. We are going to pilot with this new system, and we're going to migrate all the information pertaining to natural persons who are landing to this system, and we utilize it as a form of verification. So that is in the works. We intend to use it. We're well aware of the fact that it's now been rolled out, but it's still a pilot, and we are one of the agencies that will be one of the first to see how it works. With regards the informal sector and what is being done about this, there's a lot to say, but all I can say is the fact that when it comes to business registration, you opt to come up with a trading name. The law allows you to trade in your natural name. There is no issue with that. But, because I'll give an example. If you have 5 flats and you're renting the flat, that's a business. Do you need to register a business name for you to get rentals in the flat? In your natural name, the answer is no. Do you need to pay rental income for those businesses or for the rentals? The answer is yes. So there's really no need to register unless you want to use another name apart from your natural name for you to trade. So that is the first point. The second point is we, as much as possible, encourage businesses that we find trading and potentially should register. This is why we undertake what we call mobile registration exercise as well as awareness. We do it countrywide, we do it in other districts, and we have as many businesses jump on board. But the idea is the monthly incentives. Why should I register my business? Why should I formalize? What are the incentives? What are the benefits? Usually it's business growth, it's the fact that you benefit from access to credit from the likes of CEC. We talk about all that to try and bring them out of the informal sector. So this is the deliberate government efforts to try and ensure that those that are trading can grow. And you can only grow if you register your business. That is the best way I think I can answer this question. Otherwise, it's a very good question, and the answer is not that easy. Thank you.
I'm not sure if there are any other questions for the rest of the panel, so what I'll just do is ask that you go ahead and give your concluding remarks, specifically for the three. Mr. Mbanda, I have one more question for you. So I'll spare you for now from the, I don't know if I'm sparing you or still. Okay, so the question really is two questions. One is on state-owned enterprises, and you mentioned when basically it's declared that government is the beneficial owner, then it's left at that. But then we know that even with state-owned enterprises, you often have situations where government has a stake. It may be majority stake, but you also have players in there. It could be the Chinese, it could be the American, whoever. So in that instance, doesn't it then become important also to begin to think about how we capture beneficial ownership information of those persons? Because that becomes very important as well, especially in the context of state-owned enterprises. Open Ownership has done a briefing on defining and capturing data on state-owned enterprises. So I don't want to go into detail, but it highlights some of the best practices that appropriate registries like PAPA can adopt in terms of beginning to think about capturing bio information for SOEs, because that's very important as well. But I'm not going to go into detail, I'll just leave it at that high level for your quick response. The other was on the CIPC, the corporate registry in South Africa. I think you mentioned the, what is it, Center for Private, something, CIPC, I forget the, yeah. So you mentioned you're in the process of concluding an MOU that will basically encourage corporate registry information sharing. But that's one corporate registry in one jurisdiction. So my question then is, are there other initiatives to cooperate, collaborate, sign MOUs with other registries in other jurisdictions? Specifically because, for example, for the extractive sector, you highlighted that their ownership structures are often complex and are spread across multiple jurisdictions. So if you're going to unbundle that complex structure, then you need to collaborate with corporate registries across more than just one country. So again, the question is, any initiatives around signing MOUs with other corporate registries? For example, we're just starting with Southern Africa as a region. So again, I have a lot of questions, but I'll leave it at that in the interest of time, otherwise we'll be here all night. So maybe a response to those, and then we can proceed with concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. So for SOEs and partnership or there'll be JV with another entity, they still need for BO disclosure by the other entities. So what is the only shareholder that is affected is where government has an interest. It clearly shows that either the Ministry of Finance or the Minister of Finance as a sole corporation is the shown as in the end here. We will not mention the minister's name because he holds it on behalf of the country. But for the other entities that are not government affiliated, they would need to disclose up to the natural person. So that is the standard that I'm aware of. But I think we can always compare those with what open ownership has. But last I checked, I think that is what the best practice was. The other question is other registries. So apart from this, we have a number of jurisdictions that have open registries. So they will provide that information for free on a portal, and all you have to do is just confirm which country it is, and be able to key in. Open ownership has such a registry which we also utilize, but it's a question of which countries have this open registry. Others do not. In fact, others is really closed off. You just rely on the information that has been submitted. And that is where the challenge of verification comes in. But going forward, of course, it's a question of who you interact with and who's agreeing to share information with you. And for starters, I think South Africa was a good bet. Thank you.
Thank you. So perhaps we start with Madam Mzumara so that we move in that order. Your final thoughts or concluding remarks?
As I stated in the beginning, there's an information gap from the manufacturing sector because this is definitely a new concept. And from Zam's end is that we are happy to be part of this discussion and happy to partner as well with institutions such as Partner, Open Ownership, and other institutions. We have a membership of over 350 manufacturers, so that's already a community that can have this information and be made aware of this discussion. So in conclusion, of course, this is a multi-sectoral approach to it, and as an association, we are happy to be part of it and just raise awareness in the manufacturing sector.
Thank you.
As the Federation, we are equally happy. So the challenge is that it will take a bit of time to make our members really understand. We really have to engage them seriously. And we have mentioned that the Federation is available to partner with Partner so that we are able to reach out for our members to access the information. So this gap is a gap that cannot just be filled by Partner alone. So it needs all of us. Thank you.
Well, I think it's been a good discussion, and I go back to what I earlier on said. A good BOT regime is good for business, it's good for government, it's good for the country, it's good for civil society, the media, and all stakeholders who like to hold different players accountable. As Transparency International, we remain open to work with the private sector, different associations, including the media, so that we can advance this agenda for beneficial ownership transparency. So we are happy for the opportunity to participate in this process.
Thank you.
I think we can take 2 minutes of my finance. Those were 2 questions which I just answered. So my final thoughts that As PACRA, we will continue to engage various stakeholders. We will continue to exchange information and ideas. We'll continue to automate because we believe that through automation and data sharing that things become easier and we will be able to achieve. And also, we intend to make it easier for companies to comply. That is our goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panel, to the audience, both in person and live, for your live engagement. I hope that you found this conversation useful. This conversation is not meant to be the be-all and end-all. This is just a start. The idea is to keep these conversations going and engage further on how we can work collaboratively. We've been in civil society, private sector, background, government, every stakeholder really, because everyone has a role to play. But I prefer to say private sector particularly also has a role to play in advancing this agenda. So as I conclude, I just wanted, based on what I heard today, to synthesize the conversation and highlight some of what I've taken down as key notes on why BOT is important. So what we're hearing is we're losing a lot of resources to not knowing who owns what, where. So it's important that we know who's behind the company or corporate entity or other legal arrangement so that we can then secure resources for ourselves to advance the development agenda. I'm adding one. It's beneficial ownership transparency is key to recovery stolen assets, right? Once you begin to know who owns what, this is basically now the negative connotation, but the reality is these things happen. Financial crime, economic crime are real. So once we know who owns what, who's behind what entity, that helps us then to begin to talk about asset recovery. It improves Zambia's standing as an attractive investment destination. I think we all agreed, Mr. Bifuka has overemphasized the fact that beneficial ownership transparency ultimately is good for business. So in terms of that aspect as well, we are talking about creating fairer, cleaner operating investment climate. In terms of, and we heard this from Mr. Banda, the public procurement process, right? Knowing who's behind the company helps as well to understand who's getting public tenders, for example. Are people participating equally, or is it the politically exposed persons that are benefiting from the national cake? So that becomes an important benefit of BOT. Another integral part we get from the panel, the aspect of risk management for businesses at every level, small, medium, large. And I'll add one again. Beneficial ownership transparency protects and promotes your brand as a business, right? Because you begin to understand who to associate with, who to do business with, that protects you as a business. And so in terms of making the case for businesses, for private sector here today, in terms of advancing your role, please, these are some of the messages that you should be communicating to your constituents so that they begin to see beneficial ownership transparency as a benefit for them as well, and not just a compliance issue. So I just wanted to underscore that we have, I don't know if it's light snacks or light refreshments or it's meals at the back. So we are inviting you before you leave to join us in a snack or a meal. For the married men like myself, don't overeat, because now you have to explain to your wife so you can't eat their food. So please, it's also an opportunity for us to interact and interact before we head out to our various homes. So it's been a pleasure moderating. Oh, I'm excited. It's been a pleasure moderating this session. My name is Mr. Puka, Country Programs Associate with Open Ownership. Good night, everyone.